We'll be turning our attention to the papers, going to be joined by Portia Berry-Kilby to go through the big stories, finding out why the NHS is struggling, talking about the backlash on those masks to be worn in secondary schools, plus find out how drones are going to be using AI to protect an element of the population. A Tory peer is leading the boycott of Coca-Cola. And we'll talk about hospitals banning visitors. Why? So all of that, plus our discussions about Boris Johnson. And if that wasn't enough, we'll have our uplifting news story of the day. It's all coming up here on Talk Radio.
Early Breakfast with James Max.
On Talk Radio.
Time to say very good morning to Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator with Young Voices UK. Portia, good morning.
Good morning, James. How are you?
Very well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk Radio. Much appreciated. Now, before we turn our attention to the stories that you've picked up for us, we have to do the front pages. I can sense your excitement. The Times, ministers confident new curbs not needed. We'll be talking about curbs and various other things. And then also the split side is veteran tells Andrew to step down from guards. The fact that Prince Andrew still continues to be on the front page of the papers, not necessarily for the right reasons, it's not great for him or the royal family, is it?
It's really not. I think his interview way back when this all broke wasn't great for him or the royal family, and it's kind of been a comedy of errors, shall we say, since then, and it's not looking as though it will get any better. I don't think he was ever terribly popular anyway, but he's definitely not going to be wanting to be in the limelight anytime soon, and neither will the royal family want him in the limelight.
It would appear. I mean, what I don't understand is, whilst all this noise is going on, he protests his innocence, and I certainly agree that any individual who's accused of anything, they should have their chance to have their say and to have their legal advisors do whatever they need to do. Having said that, given that he still does have some roles, I would have thought that he should step back from all of them until or unless this is solved. I mean, wouldn't that be the easier or the better way? If he was that confident of his innocence, he should say, look, I'm innocent, I'm going to protest it, I'm going to run it through the courts, and whilst that's going on, I'm going to step back from all my official roles because I think that's the right thing to do. I think a lot of people would actually have a bit of time for that, wouldn't they?
I am sympathetic to that. I am also sympathetic to the idea that if you are innocent, why should you compromise your lifestyle in any way? And you should ride it out and then be affirmed at the end. Of course, if there has been some settlement agreed with the accuser, then it seems slightly curious if he's pleading innocence, if there are documents to be revealed.
Well, we'll find out, and I guess that story is going to continue to run, and whilst there's nothing else happening, then, well, it's going to be on the front pages. Also on the front pages, I know this is one of the stories you want to talk about, backlash at masks in schools as cases ease. Telegraph, we'll come to that story in a moment. Meanwhile, merging classes to cope with COVID staffing crisis, according to head teachers, that's what they've been told. And also they report on over half of UK black children are in poverty. This is the Guardian front page. The Daily Express, Boris holding his nerve as NHS feels the strain, is their lead. The newspaper, Prime Minister to delay decision on new COVID restrictions, they say. The Mirror, NHS crisis as staff hit by illness. We'll be talking about that story in a moment. But also the Mirror focuses on the story about Doctor Who. Apparently, the next Doctor Who is going to be a woman again. Does it matter? Is this a big piece of news?
I mean, this isn't news, is it? They broke the mold with the last Doctor. So it's really just continuing that trend. I think after you've done it once, it shouldn't really be newsworthy at all. The Doctor Who can now be whatever you want it to be.
I mean, I just think it's more down to ratings and whether the stories are good. If the stories are good, regardless who the main character is, if they're a good actor, then they're a good actor. I think the problem is that the storylines are so poor that the audience figures are falling off a cliff and it needs a reboot. But anyway, that's just me. Daily Mail, pressure piles on Prime Minister over energy bill crisis is their main story. The Sun leads on COVID mums saved by Viagra. And the Daily Star focuses on the weather by saying that we're set for a polar plunge. Already noticed it this morning, Portia. I don't know about you. You probably haven't stepped out of your front door. I have. It was noticeably colder, and it's going to get more cold over the next couple of days.
Well, I guess that makes up for the exceptionally warm New Year's Eve.
Yes, it was.
It's about time we had a proper winter, I suppose.
Oh, really? Oh, are you willing?
Well, We've had a good run of December being pretty
We haven't.
mild.
It's been wet. It's been horrible. I went into my garden. I lost half my feet as the sludge and the things, and they're terrible. I went to pick my Christmas potatoes over the last couple of weeks, and it was really rather nice that down they were. They'd grown beautifully, and they were ready to be picked. So that was nice. But getting down there, it was a boggy mess in my garden. So much rain has fallen. I don't think you care very much. Anyway, before we get to your stories, Portia, I can sense your excitement as we fasten our seatbelts for what can only be described as today's uplifting news story of the day. Under the banner headline of Posh Treats Barking Up Wrong Tree, this is not a story about Victoria Beckham. No. Dogs don't care if you serve them gourmet sausages or basic bangers. Did you know or care about this? No.
I did not know that. Maybe I care now.
Well, maybe you can now. Anyway, the authority in all things canine, this is the Kennel Club, they say that poachers don't need luxurious treats that cost a fortune. And this is after Canine Caviar that sells 6 free-range grass-fed buffalo tails on Amazon for £50, or you can buy luxury superfood sausages from the Innocent Hound at a snip at £27. Bill Lambert, who's a spokesman for the Kennel Club, says dogs are part of the family. We know owners can't help but want to spoil them, but this can actually be done very simply. Dogs do not need artisan treats, expensive luxuries, or any extensive pampering. They are at their happiest when their owners give them love and attention and provide for all their needs, taking them for walks and providing them social and mental stimulation. And that's what Stanley had yesterday. I don't know about you, but yesterday and the day before, a lot of steps. New Year's Day, I did 31,000 steps, Portia. That's how much exercise I did.
That's pretty impressive. Congratulations, James. That's more than I did.
Well done, James, and well done, Stanley, who accompanied me. So Stanley's the spaniel, so he did very well too, and off he went. Now we got a job to do, Portia. So let's turn our attention to the Times. NHS is struggling as sickness takes out 1 in 10 staff. Surely this is going to be the news story. It's no longer about COVID and restrictions and all that. It's Omicron and whether people have to take time off work. It's the pingdemic all over again.
Well, exactly. It is harkening back to the pingdemic. And I think what's interesting here is you have the old rules of COVID of having to isolate for umpteen number of days, but at the same time, your symptoms are far more mild. And whatever you do transfer over onto someone else, they're also going to be much milder than they were in the past. So it's treating a cold essentially as a pandemic, which you're inevitably going to get to the pingdemic when that's the logic.
Do you think the government, when they had the opportunity to reduce isolation from 7 to 5 days, should they have done so?
There are different studies. Some say it's going to cause greater problems down the lines. Others say it won't. I think if they reduce it, they have to concede that to catch COVID isn't as much of a risk as it was. And that takes a bit more messaging and takes a bit of transforming public opinion around it, who want to be shielded from the risk.
Do you think the government has done a good job with the data, though, that they present in terms of the case numbers, the hospitalisations, and anything else? Or do you think that there's work to be done there?
I mean, as always with data, it can fit whatever narrative you want to tell. I think it's good when the government focuses on hospitalizations and deaths, because ultimately that is what causes a strain. If you have a case and you're asymptomatic, does it really matter? And I think what we saw over Christmas is part of the increasing cases are people being responsible, taking a test before they go visit family and friends, and they're coming up positive despite them feeling fine or maybe just having a sniffle, which then causes further implications and you get this pingdemic. But the government then has to adjust its regulations and guidance on that if they want to prevent, say, bin collection shortages as well as NHS staff shortages.
Let's talk about the Daily Telegraph. So we spoke to a teacher earlier who supports this measure, but the Daily Telegraph is reporting the story about the announcement by Nadhim Zahawi, the Education Secretary, indicating that face masks will be mandatory in schools for all pupils until the 26th of January. Is this move a good one? Is it a sensible one?
I don't think so. When you look at other countries which have maintained a face mask mandate in schools, their cases have still increased. You look at Ireland, they're still in the same situation as we are now. once again, you have the younger generations who are the least at risk of having any serious impact from COVID as a virus, having to bear the brunt of restrictions. And I think there is a very valid criticism that I'm less at risk. Why do I have to put up with this? Especially as like cases are mild for them. And people will have entered the pandemic, say age 9, leave at age 11, 12.
And the cases of Omicron, though, from what we understand, is that it's the majority of them are actually with younger people. Do you think that we need to stop the spread or slow the spread? Because if masks, and this is just me putting the other side, I'm not necessarily sure that I believe, but anyway, let's see how this goes. If masks stop or slow the spread of Omicron, and then what we're really worrying about is people having to take time off because they catch it and then they have to self-isolate, as opposed to being worried about longer-term health risks or otherwise. If it stops teachers getting it or means that less teachers get it, isn't that a good thing?
I guess ultimately it depends what a teacher will have if they catch Omicron. And then that leads to an assessment of what a teacher then must do if they test positive. If it is mild, should the government be stepping in to regulate against a common cold, or what has basically become the common cold?
Well, a very good thought. I dare say we'll hear all of these arguments later. I find it very difficult to justify the use of masks or otherwise in schools, but there we go. Portia, thank you for now. We will be turning our attention back to your stories and finding out about drones and AI technology. That's next here on Talk Radio.
Good talk.
Hot talk. Bold talk. Talk Radio.
Meanwhile, we'll be turning our attention back to the papers. Joining me this morning, Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator with Young Voices UK. So let's turn our attention to another story, Portia. So the Daily Star is reporting that drones could be using AI technology, and they're going to, I don't know, protect... drones are protecting who? What on earth is this story about?
Well, that's a very good reaction, James. Probably will still be the reaction after I give an explanation.
Okay.
But the theory goes that these drones could have their technology used, that if a woman, or I suppose anyone, feels threatened at night or even during the day, they can open an app, call a drone, it comes from a police station and floods the scene with floodlights and records what is happening, as the idea is to serve as a deterrent to the attacker. In reality, it seems rather dystopian and kind of an infringement. One wonders if it is a backdoor way of increasing the possibility for surveillance, and if you allow drone technology to be used for this, where do you draw the line?
I couldn't agree with you more. I think, look, there are lots of things where if we had surveillance, if we had 24-hour security, if we had police on the street everywhere you go and every turn, you might reduce the levels of crime. The problem is that as soon as you start using cameras, in the way that we've got CCTV everywhere, and people said, "Oh yes, that'll help combat crime." No, it doesn't. It just captures the moment when something happens, and criminals, many of them, have learnt how to cover themselves up in a way that means that they can't be identified, even if you do catch. It's like, oh, good, there's another crime. Right, now what? So yeah, I just wonder whether there's any point to it at all. Okay.
Exactly.
Okay, right. Well, we're not impressed.
That.
We're not impressed with that move. That's gone. Let's turn our attention to the Guardian then. The Tory peer leading a boycott of Coca-Cola. Why?
Yes, so Robert Hayward is saying that Coca-Cola and affiliated products, so Innocent Smoothies and Fanta, people should stop buying them because Coca-Cola will be a sponsor at the Winter Olympics. And obviously, China's treatment of the Uyghurs is by some deemed a genocide, crimes against humanity. So it's the idea of cancel culture actually serving a purpose in this, and saying that no, the public expects more and public opinion matters for big companies like Coca-Cola.
I wonder whether or not this is the right thing to do, because surely this is a company that is sponsoring an event, and the event is taking place. If you really care about what's happening in China, or you want to try and change things or anything else, then you have to harm the economy in China. And in order to do that, you have to stop buying Chinese products if that's what you want to do. I think this is I just wonder whether there's any point to this. And, for example, if there really is a problem, then in fact it should be taking part in the Winter Olympics rather than necessarily looking at the sponsors.
Yeah, so this is the line of argument that to actually boycott the Olympics fully, as in withdraw athletes, would be deemed far too controversial. So some countries, the UK, the US, a couple of other Western states aren't sending officials to the games as a diplomatic boycott. But ultimately, what does that do? The games still go ahead. It seems somewhat, pittance in the face of a genocide, if that's what they believe it is, and as most people do. If that's what you think, then why aren't you doing more? And really, I think just turning off the TV and not watching the Olympics would be a greater boycott than not buying your Coke with your Tesco meal deal.
Well,
not to do product placement.
Well, quite. Other colas are available. However, we are talking about Coca-Cola, so I'm sorry, but I'm not going to stop buying it if that's what they want to support or sponsor. I tend to drink the Diet Cola variety and one or two other things. Although I have been trying to cut down on the number of fizzy drinks overall because apparently they're not great for you. But there we are. Anyway. Portia, we'll come back to you in a second. Meanwhile, we're going to turn our attention back to callers. Graham is in Berkshire. Graham, very good morning to you.
Good morning. How are you today?
Yes, very well indeed. Thank you. Yes, fine, perky, and, well, I say raring to go. I'm almost done. Julia Hartley-Brewer will be here very shortly. But yes, all is good. I hope you are too.
Oh, I'm fine. I'm awake this morning, which is always a good start.
Excellent. Well, quite. I mean, there are lots of things that we pick out, but waking up in the morning is always a good indicator that things could improve. Right now, Graham, let's talk about these face coverings and masks and things. Backlash at masks in schools as cases ease. I feel very uncomfortable about school children being asked to wear them, to be honest.
So do I. I'm a musician, and I was asked to wear one once. And anybody who wants it, I don't do the gig now. I work at care homes. I use a visor because after 35 minutes I became dizzy and started to not be able to take on enough oxygen.
Right. So you wore a visor or you wore a face mask? I
wore a face mask. Yes. I now wear a visor.
Oh, okay. But if you're trying to sing, how does that? I mean, surely a visor doesn't work if you're trying to sing.
Yeah. You've got that oxygen flow coming in.
Right.
Whereas a face mask, you're actually closing your nose and mouth off.
Right.
But I've chatted to people in shops. I'm one for that age group that chat to people. And they're saying they're finding it difficult loading shelves when they're wearing a face mask.
Right.
It's heavy. It's quite heavy lifting, moving up and down. So my worry is for children, A, are they getting enough oxygen in? When they're moving about, and B, are we asking them to sit there with a Petri dish after 6 hours?
Well, that's the other thing, is that if you don't change these things, then, one has to wonder whether there's any point to them at all. Graham, thank you very much indeed for your call. Good points well made. That's Graham in Berkshire. So if you want to join that conversation, you can always do so. It's 0344 499 1000. Meanwhile, Nick has been in touch. Good morning, Nick. Fizzy water, fizzy drink replacement, good idea. And then also says, good luck with the idea of not buying Chinese products. I think you probably got a point. Back to Portia Berry-Kilby. Just before we carry on, Portia. So Young Voices UK, what do you do?
So Young Voices UK helps young or aspiring journalists, political commentators who are liberty-minded, want to advocate for principles of freedom, competitive market, and all that jazz. So they'll pitch some ideas and help line up interviews like this.
And how old can one be in order to join Young Voices? What is young? What's the definition?
Under 30.
Under 30.
30 is the new 21.
Right. I'll bear that in mind. It's some while since I was under 30. It's a little while since I was under 40. And sadly, I'm not under 50. But never mind, that's okay. It's always good to have a wide variant of voices available. Now, let's talk about the Daily Mail. Hospitals, they've now banned visitors. What's going on?
Once again, it seems to be a return to the deep, dark days of early COVID. And an overreaction to Omicron, especially given the symptoms of Omicron, and as an attempt to limit the spread, only the patient can go into a hospital. There are a few exceptions. I think now people giving birth, so pregnant women can have partners accompany them, but ultimately it's a seeming return to March of last year.
It does strike me as slightly peculiar that these measures can be brought in, because again, I always want to look, when a measure is brought in, it should not just be about the measure and whether it's a sensible thing. It should also be about what are the unintended consequences of this particular measure. And when you bring in a measure like restricting visitors, very often, particularly if you're talking about older people, they'll say, look, I don't care whether I get it or don't get it. I just want to see family or friends, or you know, there are so many other considerations, and indeed it can be so traumatic to be in hospital, particularly if it's not somewhere that you go very often. You can feel as if you're, you know, you might need somebody to, you know, get some help for you or whatever it is. There's lots of reasons why visitors and hospital visitors are so important. This is... Yeah. This is almost like cruelty to those who desperately need to have help and support, and it seems like a sort of overreaction.
Entirely. People will say things like not having accompaniment at appointments or having to wear face masks are small measures, but ultimately they do have quite an impact on someone's day-to-day life. And it's been over a year and a half, and we have to look at the trade-offs, and are all of these pretty draconian measures still at this late time in play worth it? And I think increasingly people are saying no, and a return to normal, not a new normal, but the old normal, is what people want. Fantastic.
Thank you very much indeed for your thoughts this morning and the stories. That's Portia Berry-Kilby, political commentator with Young Voices UK. Thank you so much for joining us this morning here on Talk Radio. Much appreciated. Sure we will speak again.